Okay, hi. So today I'm going to be talking about the book The House of My Mother by Shari Franke. So, for context, this is a memoir written by Shari Franke that recounts her life growing up in the home of Ruby Franke, who was a content creator for a family vlogging channel called Eight Passengers, where she recounted all of her family's life for the world to see. The end of that story is her arrest for aggravated child abuse. This story is very well publicized. And this is Shari Franke, the oldest of the family, telling her story of her life. I'm going to kind of maybe give a little bit of an account of the situation with Eight Passengers and Ruby Franke's eventual arrest. But if you have more of an interest and you haven't heard about this, I'll put some links to a few videos. One of the channels is called Swoop, and she did a video before the arrest was made, pointing to the kind of more nefarious things that were presented on that channel, and then a second follow-up video following the arrest. I'm also going to link to a channel I follow as well that is Emily D. Baker, who is a lawyer who breaks down like the legal aspects of this and has done so for this case and parts of this case through many different videos. So I will link to the ones that I've watched and her channel as well. So this book follows Shari Franke's kind of entire life, starting even from before she was born. She grew up in Utah. She grew up in an LDS family, in an LDS community. She is an LDS member. And that kind of paints her early life. But a lot of the book talks about her struggle with her relationship with her mother. Her mother was not super maternal, not super doting. She kind of discusses in the beginning of her life um, feeling emotionally manipulated as an adult, being able to describe that feeling later on, not knowing that's what she was thinking and feeling and experiencing at the time. And some, I want to say, I guess, more like minor physical abuses where you would get pinched or poked or prodded for doing something wrong. This kind of relationship turned into a high degree of control over a lot of aspects of her life, including not being able to have a phone at times because you were grounded for doing something wrong, or being banned from certain activities. Some of these, she started having kind of a boyfriend and they found out about it, so they decided to she was going to move schools. And a lot of this book is spent kind of describing that relationship with her mother and really the dynamic that her mother set for the household, which eventually ends up being a situation where where Ruby decides to bring in Jody Hildebrandt into their life, who was also convicted of the same crimes, and how the dynamic escalates as a result of that, and her ostracization from the family, how everyone was kind of separated. I think that there's a lot of very cultish phenomenon happening here. Everyone being isolated from each other, certain language being used to describe how you're interacting with the world. When you leave everyone. So it kind of recounts those kind of years as the time goes on in the book, and you kind of see the evolution of what's happening in the household and the escalation when Jody enters their lives. I thought it was interesting to see Shari discuss Jody coming into her life, feeling like very uncomfortable about it, and then still falling into the cult-like behaviors and talking about how she ostracized her friends when she was in high school, because she started using this really like holier than thou language, thinking she was better than everyone else for having found this sort of enlightenment through these kind of cultish mentalities and behaviors, and then eventually being able to break herself free from that, but the scars that it left behind and the vulnerability that it left her in. There's discussion of sexual assault in this book. There's discussion of the really appalling kind of reaction that her church had to this sexual assault, that you do get some sort of remediation for at some point, but or at least she does, I should say, but it's this power structure of the LDS church and the men involved, and the kind of unfortunate continuous story of men never listening to women and protecting other men in positions of power. That's like very lightly touched on, but it is discussed. In case I didn't make it clear, I don't condone family channels. I don't like them. I think that there needs to be more protections in place, and I'll link another video below where Shari Franke has spoken out against this and advocates now for the rights of children in these situations. There's very little protections in place. She discusses in the book that the money made from the channel was used as like kind of a, it was almost like a financial abusive situation where they didn't get to see necessarily the money from this, and they would be told, oh, if you're in this video, I'll give you X, and then they'd never get it. There was also no protections for them in terms of making sure that they got the money, like the money from the channel, like they don't have to be paid out of it. And in fact, you come to find later on that she had drained all of the kids' accounts except for Shari's, who was an adult and was able to remove her money from her own account before this started to occur. She kind of was able to get out. So the financial abuse part, like I think that what Shari Franke is doing outside of the scope of just writing this book and spreading awareness is also advocating for new protections and new laws, at least in Utah, which she also speaks to is very high population of people in the LDS community. Part of the LDS community is trying to spread your faith. And part of that is by showing your family, because family and having large families is important. But I do want to talk a little bit about a fairly large bias that I see in this book. And I think, just to put it out there, that the bias makes sense. She has separated from her abusive mother, who is now in prison. She is trying to pick up the pieces of her family, and they are trying to be normal, or what normal looks like for them again. And that means that her father is in the picture. Now, to be frank, he was always in the picture, and that's part of my problem. So Kevin, the father, has not been tried, has not been convicted of anything, and how the book ends seems like he either has or will be getting the young children back, because many of them are, I think at least 4 of them are still underage. But he never took action that was documented on the page. He never took action when pre-Jody, when the abuses felt smaller, when there was time to protect the children's assets and finances by ensuring that they were consenting to being in videos. He doesn't seem to have done that based off of this book. He would advocate for them, or at least for Shari, because this is her story, up until a certain extent, and Ruby would generally always win. And then when Jody came into the picture and he was brainwashed, which I feel is much different of a situation than a teenager getting sucked into a cult. That's a much different conversation than an adult man getting sucked into a cult and taking no action to ensure his children are protected. Regardless of what we want to have a conversation around with brainwashing and stuff, like, he left the house. He left the children be with Ruby. And I want to have a conversation around that because there's this cultural idea rooted in the patriarchy that women are more culpable for the negative things that happen to their children. So while in this situation, Ruby was the perpetrator of the violence, of the abuse, of the discord in the family, a lot of the time men's actions or father's actions, his inaction is overlooked because the mother is the child rearer. I'm not quite sure where that stems from in our society, but I do think it's interesting that now that he's here, now that he's willing to protect his children, which is great and admirable, he's given a break for not doing it when he could have been preventative. And then when the men are the perpetrator of the violence, it's still somehow the woman's fault for not leaving, for not getting out, for not getting the kids out. So just, I think, is an interesting thing to note in this kind of discourse, that I still find him completely culpable for all of these things. And I understand the book and her trying to just move on and rebuild a relationship with her father, which I can absolutely respect. But I don't take that stance when it comes to a situation like this. I also kind of wanted to talk about another kind of topic that came up with this book, and this is, I think it's a Utah-specific law. I'm not quite sure if other states have similar laws. I'm trying to think of what they called it because it had a very strange name. It was like free-ranging children or something, but it's like this concept that kids can have their own independence and it's not considered abuse. So walking to school and stuff like that, and I believe the book said it was established in the state in 2018, and this caused a lot of problems because when Shari Franke, the teenager who dealt with the abuse, and then the teenager who was ostracized from her family, and then the young adult who went to college and tried to work through her own problems and then realized the dire situation that her family was in and tried to advocate for them, went through the correct channels, contacted authorities, contacted Child Protective Services, got a case opened, and they were not able to pursue it for lack of evidence. And then she talks about when the children are found not in a good physical state, not in a good mental state, isolated and abused, and the sheriff or the police officer of some sort says to her that they're sorry, but they're now investigating. And it took, for those who are unfamiliar with the case, it took the youngest boy escaping from a house, making contact with a neighbor, and the neighbor seeing his state for the cops to be called and for this situation to finally be taken seriously. it just sheds light on those types of situations. Like, it wasn't just her calling CPS. It was neighbors who were concerned. The house was getting emptied. The husband was told to leave. No one was in contact with each other. She couldn't put eyes on her own siblings because she was being ostracized and kept out because she was a threat to the behaviors, the horrible behaviors that were going on. And our systems didn't do anything to protect those children before serious damage had been done. So this is like not much of a book review itself, but it's a topic that I've been keeping up on in the news. It's a few different situations with the protections around children, specifically in the family vlogging aspects that I am passionate about. And I read this book because I wanted to see the perspective of someone who had lived it, who could authentically share and voice what they're doing. And so I think that's it. I think that if you haven't followed the case, you can still go into it without watching and reading and listening to all of it, but seeing the duplicity of the nature of Ruby Franke post-arrest, and the way she tries to make herself no longer culpable for her actions, I think that knowing that and then reading this and kind of seeing how her thirst for power over other humans has always been present, at least for me, made this book a little bit more impactful. But that is all I have for this video. So until next time, happy reading.